In this section, we'll be talking about the final components, which I'll begin with they're sort of more basic components. I'll begin with the quartz disc that's at the bottom of the pyramid. It's a big, chunky, pretty thick quartz disc. And this is the original one that I made. It was this is all natural. This is a synthetic quartz. This is the natural facets of the quartz, how it grows. I've polished it a little bit on the top, and just by grinding it down, it's sort of transparent there. And this is, yeah, one of the originals that I used. It's incredibly crude, but yeah, I have a much better one in the pyramid, which was machined overseas. It's very good quality, actually. It's not concave like it should be, but it's a very good quality flat disc. So basically, what this quartz, this big crystal disc does is, well, the position's quite obvious. You would have seen it a few times with the picture that comes up, but you've got the lower silver disc, as you know. And the quartz disc, the rays going up to the crystal, follows those rays. It's concave the same way. Hasn't, like, because it's a smaller diameter, but sorry, a smaller concave, but it's the same. It's in line with the rays that go up to the quartz up there, where which we've spoken. So it's the part we're talking about is this part here, this big quartz crystal disc. Its thickness is, I've forgotten how thick it is, but again, refer to the CAD picture. All you need to know about this disc is it's concave, which you can figure out really easily by putting the point here and figuring out the arcs at this distance. It does not have to be that specific where it sits at all because of what it actually does. But basically, it is cut on its z-axis, like everything. It doesn't really matter its orientation on its x and y axis, as far as I know. I mean, you can have it just, if you do know those axes and get them marked, it would be helpful. But really, it's cut down. It's cut like this one. Well, this one's not cut, but it's like flat. It's like on its z-axis. So basically, yeah, it's a big, thick crystal disc that's completely transparent. And what happens is, when the waves are going to and fro from this backwards and forwards to the crystal, they pass through the disc, you see. And the disc acts sort of like a giant energy capacitor. It's a giant capacitor for energy. It's like a big battery. Technical as it sounds, it's a big crystal battery of ether energy, etheric energy. It plays no part whatsoever in the third dimension. It's all ether based. It's a very simple component. What it does, it's almost like a big battery, and I think it also filters the waves as well, slightly, modifying them slightly, as well as the constant interaction with it, backwards and forwards, probably leaks a bit of ether through. It probably like accumulates extra power inside the disc. So basically, by the pressure going through it. Say if the standing waves are lined up like this, so that there's a major pressure point in the center of the disc, where it's, again, refer to the drawing in CAD where it's positioned. The pressure point inside here constantly pressure, because it's equivalent, all the energy in this point is equivalent to the energy here. It's the same amount of energy, but over this great space, whereas all that energy is actually condensed to the crystal. Yeah, the constant pulsations, the pressure put on the disc would probably, I mean, it stores energy, but it would probably also leak a bit of extra energy through by that action. And as well as that, it sort of modifies the wave a little bit. Like if it was coming in, it does something I'm not quite sure of, but the essence of what it does is store energy as a giant sort of capacitor, crystal capacitor. Yeah, it's a big bulky sort of disc, as you can see, and I mean on its own, I'll just draw it on its own again. It looks like that. It's not drawn too well, but you can very easily see what it looks like in the drawing. That's pretty much it for the disc. It's like a component which may not even need to be in the pyramid, but it is. The original design that's in the ether, where the blues use, where the one with the females that sits in the pyramid, has this component in it. It does. It's there. And because it's quite easy to make, I have made, I do put it in there. So that is that component. I'm going to illustrate the next components together, which is basically the capstone and the mercury reflector in the capstone. So say if this is the pyramid going up to the capstone, and the capstone starts here. At this point, it's 1/4. It goes down vertically 1/4 of the height of the pyramid. And even though it's called capstone, it's actually made of copper. And what it does is, so if you've got the frame coming up here, which is about 3 mm thick, what it does is, it gets thicker here. I've drawn it in CAD. Because it's one piece that's sort of sealed, one copper piece, it acts as the opposite reflector to the reflector at the bottom of the pyramid, the big silver reflector. But it doesn't sort of act as it more acts as a block than a reflector, like it becomes like a charged up block. It's very interesting. It's not like it sort of mirrors the bottom, but it's the top at the same time. It's very weird and strange. It's like, it took us ages to figure out its function, because, well, its specific function, because you couldn't see into it when we were remote viewing it, and that's because it's made of thick copper, and it blocks to a degree the energy, basically. So it was very hard to see into it, and it sort of seems like it's a sort of less significant part of the design, but it's still very important. But basically what it is, quite simply, is like the reflectors, the component to block the energy. And it's hollow on the inside, but it has a thicker wall diameter, which you'll see in the drawing. The wall of the copper, and it's one mold as well, because if it's soldered together, there's going to be cracks and weak spots. The energy is going to rush out and escape. And that whole, all that pressure on the lower disc down here is going to, it's not going to build up onto that disc, because this side of the pressure pushing upwards is just going to all escape, pretty much. So it's very important that it's completely sealed, just like the disc. But basically, the reason it is like that is because you can't really like just have a flat disc at the top of the pyramid. So it's married, this copper capstone is married to another component called it's a mercury disc. It sits in the top of the capstone, and it follows the same laws as the bottom. Its diameter is half that of the diameter of the capstone, which is 1/4 of the height from here to here. It comes down exactly 1/4 the height of the pyramid. And this little disc, see, the glass company that had it made by messed it up and just sent me this one anyway. It wasn't made properly. You see this one. You can see that or not. It's a cute little weird thing, double concave at the top and at the bottom, but not very well made, this one. And it's not supposed to be made like this either. It has a hole in it so that the vacuum, so that you can put the mercury and salt in, but also it's just left open because the vacuum in the pyramid will get into here as well. And yeah, you don't want to close that, it needs to just stay open. But so this component is basically, it's connected in 4 spots to the copper capstone just by thick copper wire connecting in there to platinum electrodes. So you got your mercury and you got your salt crystals sitting in the top. It's just such a weird component. It seems sort of not as clean as the other parts of the pyramid, like not as it's almost like it had to be this way, but it's just because of the way the design is. But basically, yeah, it is, if this is your crystal, let's say, and the energy is coming down here, this concave has to be accurate. It has to be pretty accurate. So the way to do it would have a concave, would have the whole thing machined separately, have a concave machined separately and stuck to the base of this disc. So the mercury on top of the concave would be perfect as a mirror, because the concave of the glass would be made really well. So basically it's connected on four of its, and you can see the little holes here. That's where the electrodes go in, and it's connected in so it touches the mercury, and it's connected to the corners of the capstone, not the sides or the top, the corners of the capstone. And basically what that does is, energetically, it fuses this component with the capstone. So what that does is all the energy that's accumulated in the capstone, and this is not released, basically. This connection to the capstone makes this whole component one, but it changes material as it goes into the mercury and the salt crystals, which is, it's like the tube in the middle of the pyramid, but it's much bigger. And it has the mercury and salt in it so that the energy can pass through it correctly, and the vibrations that are going on in here will actually transmit the energy down. So it's not only a reflector, but it's also gathering whatever energy that's in the capstone and sending it down, adding it to the system. Like so. So it's pumping in sort of a bit of energy as well. And this is where it gets into extra little components which are really, they're sort of very unspecific, but there's two. There's a little hole in the top of the capstone, which I don't think needs to actually be there, but you see, all this data came from the extraterrestrial version, which is obviously made perfect, but apparently there's a little hole, and it makes sense in a way because it would balance the system so that the hole down the bottom and its function, which we explained, is not imbalanced, in a sense that the energy might have too much pressure in a certain part of the system because there's two opposite reflectors each other, and if it's all coming out just one, it may imbalance slightly. So there is a little hole in the top, and I don't honestly know if it has to be there, but it is in the design that I made. But again, it gets complex. On top of that, and this is what I actually don't know, is that there is probably a crystal in here as well. So this whole system, in a way, is a reflection of the whole pyramid. It's the same. It's like copied almost and stuck on the top. It's not stuck on the top of the top, but it's like the same in a way. Like this concave here is like the concave of the bottom, and the crystal here represents the center of the pyramid, where all the energy is, where the file is, and it has your little hole up the top. It's like a little pyramid on top of a pyramid. It's really strange, and sort of a component I don't really try to think about too much because it's very, very much fine-tuning the whole system, and it's tricky to get to. It's tricky to deal with it, but the main thing that it does, really, only what it's really doing, is acting as a reflector, as an energy block, and it's adding energy into the system at the same time. And it has to be set up like this because the top of the pyramid has to remain sharp. It's not flat, so you have to modify the sharp points and make it flat by basically soldering, connecting the wires to the corner of the capstone to this mercury concave, double concave disc thing, and that sets up the block. So even if there was a hole in this system and the energy leaked through, which it's supposed to a little bit, it doesn't matter because it's fused with this solid. You see, if this part was the reflector, then the capstone would be the block. It would stop the energy from getting through whatsoever. So none of it would escape. So more or less, this reflects back, and whatever energy builds up in the stone is basically trapped there, and a little bit gets through that hole, the supposed hole, but whatever doesn't would build up extra pressure and be shot back down through the hole. But the hole and this crystal here is all fine-tuning business. It's something you don't bother worrying about until later on. I wouldn't, but it's, again, a little uncertain between these two, especially whether or not the hole has to be in the top. I don't think it does, but it would optimally, just as a well-made, anything that's well-made, it probably should, because it is there. So that's basically the top quarter section of the pyramid. And just going over it quickly once more, that's your energy reflector, which is connected to your energy block. They're separate. The reflector and the block is separate, basically, in this case, whereas just the normal silver reflector is all one. It's reflecting and blocking. This is separate, being here, the disc being the reflector, and the capstone ensuring no energy escapes out of the system. If none of these were here, then all of it would escape and just go straight through the crystal and keep going, and that would be that. So that explains that. Now the very last component I'm going to talk about is sort of a component, but it's not. It's more just a process that's done to one of the components, but it is important, and it involves the outside. You've got your quartz, you've got your fused quartz, or if you're lucky, your grown quartz panelled case that keeps the vacuum in and the atmosphere out. But, and it's, instead of being clear, what it's supposed to be is slightly frosted. And that's basically what we're talking about here. And the reason for that is, and again, this is all fine tuning and tweaking. This is really like just, I'm being really thorough. I don't think it has to be frosted, but it is in the ethers, it is frosted. And that is because if it was clear, which it can be in the beginning, but if it was clear, the radiation is going to go through just like this. Any waves that go through are just going to go through, not a problem. But if it's part frosted on one side, let's say this side, the waves are going to go through and they're going to disperse more evenly. Like frosted, when I say frosted, I don't know if the word's translucent or opaque, but like those light bulbs which are slightly ground, the glass is slightly ground, makes them appear white so you can't see in, but the light's nice and evenly distributed and diffused. And the reason for that is, if there's any harmful radiation, so not harmful, but if there's, it's sort of more evenly, just like light disperses the energy. So it's not so harmful to the aura, because direct waves coming out of the pyramid are probably quite crude and are probably quite sort of powerful to your system, your aura. I used to make these systems, these cases, out of quartz crystals and quartz and salt crystals mixed together, because I didn't know whether or not it was to disperse the waves, or if the quartz and salt crystal, which is possible, may actually act as a kind of sort of outer battery for the whole system as well. So if that's one of the panels of the side of the pyramid. An outer battery to basically send in and out more energy. But either way, I don't think the component's a huge priority. I just don't think it's a refined, I'm talking about refining the whole thing. It's not something of main focus. It's the very last thing you'd worry about, pretty much. But I thought I would bring it up anyway. So just to go over it once again, this edition is talking about frosting the case slightly, the vacuum case, so that instead of the energy passing straight through as light would through glass or quartz, it goes through and on the outside is diffused, so it will split up just a little bit, and it's not going to do that to the ether wave really, but to light frequencies it will. And that may be quite simply just to prevent your aura from being exposed to direct light. It's probably, strange as it sounds, it's nicer for the aura if it's diffused a bit and more balanced. I'm now just going to talk about the position of the components, in a sense of their orientation, pretty much. Because we've been talking about the position of them and everything else, but basically what I did mention, but it is clear on the drawing, is the diameter of the sphere of the Alpha and Omega, and it's quite simple. If you, as you see on the drawing, if you follow the lines from the lower reflector up to, what have we got? You start from this point, not here, because that's the angle of the concave, but if you start here and go up, basically, let me just check if I've got that right. May not. I can't check it. I think it's on this angle anyway. It doesn't matter, but you start down here at the bottom. If you follow these lines up to the Mercury disk, and see the Mercury disk has that as well. Goes up to the apex and then stops. And you've got your pyramid here, the copper frame, let's say. These lines here govern the diameter of the sphere. Oof, goodness me, I'm losing my touch. These lines govern their diameter, and the height is governed by the sphere that fits inside the pyramid equally. So the sphere that fits inside the pyramid governs the height, and the diameter is governed by the lines, what fits into these lines. So those two variables govern the diameter of the sphere within here, and the rings are governed by where the tips, by where the alpha tip is. So, and there's a bit of movement you can do with the rings, but basically you have to follow that law. It makes itself pretty much. The whole thing designs itself. You only need that 63-degree angle, and you can really easily figure out where everything has to go, because there's no other way it could possibly be if you follow that law of geometry. So again, the rings are created by following this line up here, the main line, and which governs the diameter of it, and you elect that by the height, by creating the sphere, perfect sphere within the pyramid and finding its center, and you get the diameter of this, which gives you the diameter of the alpha, gives you the diameter of the alpha omega rings, and you know where they're positioned because the tip of the alpha is at the height, the way it is on its angle, because it follows the natural vector angle as well. The height, it's the depth of that is where the tip is, and the height is the part you can adjust. As I said earlier on, I had mine originally going up to a sharp tip, but then had to file them down a little bit, and just assumed where it should be, really, which was 2/3 of the total height if it went up to a sharp point, pretty much. But it's very easy to figure those things out as well, if you understand the grid and how it works. Now moving on to the polarities of the system, and the easiest way to configure all of this is by looking from the top down. So to do that, what I'm going to do is just draw it as a square. Draw the pyramid as a square. And there's another different type of image which will come up, which has already come up a few times, which illustrates this. And this is all the combinations, like the way the pyramid is aligned. And basically it starts with, let me just check this. What have we got? And the picture that does come up will be just a little bit out of date. There's things about it which aren't quite right. And there's things also which I've explained which won't be quite right in the end design, but everything is very, very close. Especially the main things, they're very, very close. Well, the main things I think are exactly correct. The geometry's always been correct because it can only follow one way, but the finer things, they can vary. Basically, these configurations, this is the configuration. So if you're looking as a pyramid from the top down, the apex being here, and the field's flowing like this. Say if this is the south side, the west side, the north side, and the east side. South flowing from in this direction, because that's the direction it flows in. West flowing in this direction. From west to east, from south to north. And the actual user of the pyramid is on the north side. And this is the way you use it when it's all set up. You have to be on the north side. I'm just going to draw the head here as well. And the very long arms. Just as a schematic, these are the arms of the person, pretty much. But basically, you have to hold the side of the pyramid. And the way it works best is if you're on the north side, on the alignment behind the pyramid, because the energy is coming in this way and it's going this way. It's coming in from the gravity vector as well, from top down. Yeah, it's held like that, pretty much, on the sides, about a third of the way up. And you have to use your focus as well. That's all sort of irrelevant for the time, but that's just the way it is. So the alpha basically comes in at this angle. I'm drawing, this is not drawn correctly, it's supposed to be just like this, but the alpha is pointing towards self. These are all just polarities and configurations, so you don't mix them up. The alpha is this direction. So it's a ring. So if the circuit's running down here to the tube up the top, the coil is from the west side to the east. It runs counterclockwise, and then it runs through the tube, and then it runs again counterclockwise, the same direction, which actually I get confused very easily with polarities because it's just something I've always had, but that's why I write them down 50 times and make sure they're correct. But when the energy is going through here, as far as I remember, the energy is actually opposing the magnetic field, because the magnetic field runs from south to north, the same direction as the ether drift, which is flowing from west to east. The magnets flow in the same direction, being north being this side, south being this side. And I think the coils are wound opposing the field. So the energy, what happens is the energy comes through here and is sort of encouraged to slow down. Because, and it might sound strange, because the coil needs some load. Like the coil's wound in a way which doesn't thrust it forwards, but is sort of, it goes straight through without resistance, but whatever's lost is pushed backwards. Whatever energy that's lost coming out of the coils, which some of it should, is being, the coil is wound in a way which sends the energy back, which is opposing this magnetic field. So there's this backwards and forwards pulse going on as it's oscillating, because it oscillates electrically like this, but the energy is running through like that. I said it's a dual function. There's two things going on in different dimensions. The way the energy runs through, when some of it is put into the coil, it's sending it in opposition to the field, and that pulsing effect seems to leak energy through into this dimension. That's just something I thought I'd clarify. With setting the whole thing up and getting it to work, it's maybe possible, maybe, I'm not sure, to have an extra capacitor here, one that's not part of the system at all, just to tune it up a bit if the tolerances for this are out, in a sense that if you need extra capacitance for whatever reason, it may be possible, I'm not sure, to put a capacitor in, put the wire in the wrong spot, here, so it's in parallel with this and this. I'm not exactly sure, but I've just drawn it in there anyway. But again, you need to know if it's going to disturb the energy or not. But it may be possible, it may very well be possible just to put a little capacitor in there to tune it up electrically if you run out of tolerances, if you run out of, there's not enough capacitance in the rings. Then you have your box, which is in this corner, your many plates in series, and then it goes, say if the Omega ring's down here, it connects to it like so. The ring runs looking top down, as we are, from counterclockwise from out to in, like so. There's about 6 or 7 turns counterclockwise. It's just the number that seems to work best for the energy, and the ratio of it, the ring, they're of equal spacing, the concentric rings, so they're not a ratio or anything like that. They're just of equal spacing from each other, and there's actually 7 turns. I haven't drawn 7, but there's actually 7 turns going counterclockwise from out to in. And the gaps, which I've also illustrated, aren't correct, that are on the drawing. They're written at 10 microns and really small diameters, and that's because that's before I actually knew the science behind why the gaps have to be a certain diameter. And it's very simple to work out because electrically the argon will jump between the gaps at a certain diameter, which I said was about 7 millimeters at 1,000 microns. And the gap here, which is, I don't know if in the beginning I said the gap here was supposed to be smaller or larger, but it's actually supposed to be larger. It's supposed to be larger. It's a larger gap. So let's say it's 8 millimeters. It only has to be a bit larger than that. And when it's a larger gap, the vacuum becomes higher, which is a lower number, just to confuse you. But like it may be like 800 microns, I'm not sure. But when all of that is done and it's bypassed, you can bring the vacuum in the unit all the way down to 200 microns, where it works optimally. And the gap, the distance between the gaps doesn't matter once it's started, but it very much does before it started. So roughly, but yeah, the alpha omega gap should be about 6 to 7 millimeters roughly, and this gap here between the omega and the middle of the alpha should be larger, because it just has to be larger to a degree, because it just is going to tell it's just to get the energy to follow one path to start with, and then it will alternate to the other path once you pull a higher vacuum, because it wants to go to that different path because it's less resistance at that vacuum level, so it will jump to the path with the higher gap, with the wider gap. Which you can all look that physics up on the internet. It's called spark gap breakdown, I think it's you look up the charts with the inert gases. I've forgotten, but yeah, it's a spark gap breakdown. It's got a law by an inventor. I've forgotten his name, but it's a spark gap breakdown in the vacuum, and you'll get all the figures and the vacuum chart and everything to figure out the how wide the gap has to be at what vacuum and what inert gases break down at what voltage, etc., etc. So that's basically the polarities of the system. Another thing I forgot to mention: the diameter, the thickness of the copper on the alpha and omega is quite thin. It's different for the rings; they're very thick, as you can see. But the alpha omega rings, alpha omega alpha tip and the omega coil, the thickness of the copper is about 0.2 to 0.3. It's quite thin. It's very thin. It's probably close to 0.3, possibly a bit higher, but it's very thin. It's very thin. It's just to guide the energy, and it's not going to overload with resistance or anything like that. And it has to be thin so it can vibrate and do other weird sort of stuff it does do when it's working. The alpha actually vibrates when it's working, sort of up and down. If it's connected to the ring, it just has to be free to move. Both of them have to be free to move. You can't. They've got to be sort of almost as if they're floating in midair, nice and free to just vibrate and do what they want. This will be hard to set up, the coil here, because you have to support it, but not let it touch anything, and you have to support it in a way that the energy is not going to be blocked. Also, the whole system has to be supported on something. I use plastic, but that's not that good. I'd recommend using, to support everything in the pyramid, I'd recommend laser cut mica. I think that's probably the best thing you could do is use mica, because it's organic and natural. It's sort of plastic-like, and it has a bit of flex. It's not just going to snap. If you have glass supports, it's not going to just. It's very easy to break glass. I mean, it'd be really nice to have them made out of quartz, but you have to water jet it. I would say just a laser cut mica, natural mica, and that would be a good material to use for the supports. What else haven't I covered? That's pretty much it, I think. That's the bulk of the information for the thing. It's, I mean, I'm not like giving the information as if like this is all you need to know to build it, because honestly, I don't have all the information. I have I'd estimate 95 to 98% of the design. The bits I don't understand yet are the tuning, but to get the vortex working in the machine, I do have enough information for that to easily get it working. To tune the crystals is a daunting thought, and the oscillators and the resonators seems very tricky to me at the moment, but to get the system working, to pull up the energy, seems quite easy. I just don't know. I just haven't had the money to do it, because what happened was, I'm just checking this. Yeah. I've only known really, look, the way that I got the information to build it keeps coming. And it started off, if you saw some of my original designs, they look so crude and ridiculous because they started off looking so unco, and looking back at them, they're not right at all. They're completely wrong. But that was how I figured out how to make the thing. The way I figured it out was by physically building them. But what's happened is, well, I've had the design, the correct design to build them. I've really had only over the last 3 years, and little bits of information keep coming through, and it's sort of easy now because I don't think about it as much, but the information does continue to come through, and basically I know what's correct and I know what I'm unsure about, because some things just don't change anymore, some things do. The things that change are the things which I haven't 100% solidified, but the things that don't are set and will never be changed, and I haven't changed them because they're sort of universal in a way. But yeah, what I've given is really the heart of the whole thing, and if anyone understands the basic concepts with the information I've given, they'll be able to make it. Now, I don't really believe that it will be made like by an individual, because it's near impossible to create the thing. If you understand things and how to construct things, it's what I've explained is very complicated to get right, and to have to do it over and over and repeatedly, and it just is, it's just that way, it's always been that way. And I know because I've done it myself repeatedly, and it's incredibly frustrating to be... I used to walk around the suburbs of Melbourne to the big factories and just think, what am I doing? I've done this so many times. I used to work all day, and after working on the weekends just walk around the factories, because I didn't have a car, I didn't like driving in the city. And basically it just exhausted me, and it was so frustrating to have to do so much just to get a few little parts, and get so many parts, and buy so many tools. I'm having a bit of a whine, but so I'll stop there. But basically, to put it simply, the pyramid is like a blessing, but it's in disguise. I don't think people recognize what it is until the future. What the pyramid's ultimate use was for, and it was in my mind, was to have it at a place on the planet where, because the pyramid has a huge aura around it. So if that's separate, and what happens when that is created, and this is on a huge scale, so this would be a really large version. There'd be little people here, you know. And what the idea was because what happens is the pyramid aura is so strong, it excludes the aura of the planet. And that's not to say that it rejects the aura of the planet, it's just that it's dominant over the aura of the planet within that space. And so you can create a world within a world, a microcosm within a macrocosm. And basically inside there you could create you could create anything. I wanted to make it as like a sanctuary, because being in here, the influence that it would have on you would be quite profound, and you could make it what you wanted, because the whole thing is telepathic. It's like being within an aura of a person, but it's huge and it reaches out. Create a nice world within the harsh world that we exist in, and that would be pretty cool, I think. It would have a higher vibration. It would entrain you inside this world. It'd be like a little utopia. It would entrain you to a higher state because you're exposed to this higher frequencies here, and it can be done. It most certainly can be done. And this field, I call it the Meissner field, a superconductive field around the pyramid. Weak one, well, strong, very strong, but the whole thing would be covered. And yeah, I mean, I could go on and on about this place. I had a name, I called it Andronia, which means balanced place. And I think that would be the place to be. And I think that will exist one day in the future. I'd like to think that I could build it in my lifetime. But it's just like, the technology is futuristic. It's way ahead of its time in a sense that it's already jumped past so many concepts which haven't even been discovered yet. It's like I went to the future, pulled back something and brought it to the present, pretty much. And the present is here. Past, present, future, and my brain sorted out. Or it was sent to me, I don't know, the ET sent it across, that's for sure. But I don't know why they sent it exactly. But, or it could have been my future self sending it back, I don't know. Could be anything, but the machine design is sound. And there's a lot of resources, energy, and cash in the world, and this is just a grain of sand. To actually get this built, and for what it does, it costs nothing. It costs absolutely nothing. But again, the world's not ready for it, I don't think, because if it was, it could be identified for what it truly is. It would be working on it, and I wouldn't just be doing it all myself. But yeah, that's just quite simply the way it is. It just has to, things are the way they are, and I just don't like, I get annoyed with ironies, things that just become ironic, how things can be so easy, but we do them the hard way, and it's just a small little investment in an idea. I mean, like, yeah, I've contacted so many people in regards to this. I've contacted so many people, tried to explain how it works. It just, there's no reception. It just does not sink in. None of the concepts do, none of the ideas. It's not believed. Physicists scoff at it. I just laugh at it. It's a field day for them because without thinking, they just dismiss it because it doesn't fall into what they've been taught. But this is just laws which haven't yet been discovered. And they're older than the laws that we use. They're connected more to the source than the laws that we use are just an echo of the source, more or less. But yeah, so that's my vision, so to speak, to create like it would be like along the lines of a school, you know. It'd be sort of like a schooling, but it wouldn't be like a cult or anything like that. It would just have, you come as you go as you please. There'd be like laws and that. You wouldn't be able to do certain things in here because I wouldn't want the field disrupted. But it would be pretty free kind of a place. And it'd be the best way to get high. It'd be the natural way to get high because it would lift you up and make you feel young and inspired again. And it would make you healthy and detox you, and it'd just be super magical if you can imagine what it'd be like to have a nice little bubble away from the psychic terrors of this world, because this world's going down the toilet energetically. It's just not the same as it used to be. It's all... And originally when I drew this thing, I had in the background the city, you see, because the city is a dark version, and it's a city of sorrows. Oops. The city of fallen people, and the city is a dense place. This is like a little utopia outside of that, and you can look at it over the thing, because there is a sphere around the city too, a psychic sphere, and it's the sum of all the thoughts of the people in the city. It's the densities, and the desperation and the misery and the things. You can feel it. It's really strong, and it's gotten stronger over the years. It's gotten weirder and more synthetic and denser. So this is to counteract that. It's just supposed to be. If people want this, they really want it, it can be done. And you can just say goodbye to this. I like the idea of visiting this when I want, but getting out when I want, and living at a place like this. I think that's about as much as I'm willing to share. And I'm going to leave my contact details at the end of the video. I don't think there's anything more to say. So that's it.